Having grown up as a Catholic, I was asked to talk about the Christmas holiday from that perspective. A little background, I was born in Tijuana in the late 1950s and spent a lot of my early childhood with my grandmother, my abuela. She was a small but extremely strong, capable, religious, resilient, and loving woman. She and my grandfather got married in secret by a priest in Mexico in the late 1920s with the help of rebels called cristeros, who were people who fought against the dictatorship then in power, who persecuted priests, nuns, and, intellectuals. My grandparents started their married life in a small ranch in the state of Jalisco, eking out a living for their growing family, which included my grandfather, grandmother, father, one uncle, 4 aunts, and they all moved in the early 50s to Tijuana so that the 3 men in our family could easily cross to the US back and forth to work in the bracero program. 3 of my aunts' husbands also worked as braceros. My abuela was the center of that large family that eventually grew to have 37 grandchildren. One by one, each of the families permanently moved to the US after we got our green cards. In my first home, as a 7-year-old in Santa Barbara, was at a small ranch on Puente Drive, where Hal and Mary actually now live, and where my father had gotten work as a stable hand. Isn't that life weird? I have many happy memories of going to my abuela's house in Tijuana. It was a small, bright green stuccoed house which she kept immaculately tidy. Being a devout Catholic, she would attend early daily mass, walking many dusty blocks on streets that were not yet paved. She was a constant presence in my family's house, lending a hand to my mother or one of her own daughters and their several very young children. 2 of my aunts each had 9 children. One had 12, unfortunately only 9 lived. My grandmother was a master at her old pedal singer sewing machine, constantly sewing clothes for all her grandkids. She also helped take care of her then elderly and bedbound parents. As I was one of the older and more well-behaved grandchildren, abuela would many times take me with her to the morning masses. And many years, I thought I was her favorite. But years later, I found that every grandchild was her favorite at a family reunion. They kept telling me that they thought that they were her favorite. She had hopes that I would become a nun and that some of my male cousins would become priests, but none of that happened. There were other times when some of my siblings or cousins would come along to the masses, and especially the boys who would squirm, talk, fight, or otherwise misbehave. They'd get a real quick pinch, like right here, real hard, and that worked to settle them down. She also had us pray the rosary every night we spent with her. She had such a deep devotion and reverence that as a child I wanted to be like her, but after adolescence that feeling kind of waned. Christmas time was the most fun for all of us, as when some of our family members who had previously emigrated to the US would return to abuela's house to celebrate. We would go to midnight mass, then come back to her house. She would have made lots of tamales for us, and there would be buñuelos. I don't know if you know what that is, but flat, sweet, syrupy, delicious thing. Pan dulce and Mexican hot chocolate, among other things. I also remember her making for the adults a type of eggnog with liquor. I think it was called rompope. The small house would be bursting with happy relatives spilling out onto the patio. And then all the kids would sleep like wall to wall on the floor in her house. It was fun. There was one year, this didn't have to do with my grandmother, but When I was about 12 years old, my parents took my entire immediate family to see other relatives in Guadalajara, Mexico, to visit a family member. It was very memorable to me as we traveled all the way from Tijuana to Guadalajara by bus, which took a couple of days. After Guadalajara, we went to the small town of Mascota, Jalisco, where my father had partially grown up. It was a picturesque town in a green, hilly area with really clean cobblestone streets. The people were always outside sweeping all the time. It was great. As my parents walked through the town to get to our relatives, the locals would come out of their own homes to say hello and to invite us in for a visit during our stays. But the most fun we had during that trip was when we participated in Las Posadas, the Christmas ritual of going from house to house in the recreation of Joseph and Mary asking for lodging in Jerusalem to stay before Mary gave birth. In Latin American countries, this is done on Christmas Eve, and some do it for 9 days before. There's a call from the people outside who represent Mary and Joseph, and the people inside the house sing back their own verse, denying them lodging until they reach the last house where they are permitted to stay. Then people go into that last house and celebrate with food, drink, tamales, atole, which is a Mexican thick drink made of corn, sweet Mexican bread, and there's a piñata. That feeling that stuck with me then and now is that there was a feeling of community, fun, and love. The current custom of spending too much time, money, and effort thinking of what gifts to give one another, families or friends, or their children did not then exist. It was just the spirit of celebrating together and remembering that Jesus is the reason for the season. I am not sure whether this is still the case, as I haven't visited Mexico at Christmas time since way back then, but I sure hope it is. And thank you, Reverend Jonathan, for asking me to do this, as I was able to revisit the wonderful memories that I still carry, especially remembering my abuela. I'm going to send this around, which has a picture of my grandmother and grandfather. And there's also the verses of the Las Posadas song, if anybody wants to take a look at it and just return it back to me. And thank you.
Good morning. I also brought props. Let's see if I can, yes, perfect. It's our Lucia tree topper. I'm Christina Boardman. I'm your RE religious coordinator, and today I'll be talking about one of my family's traditions, Santa Lucia. Santa Lucia is commonly practiced in Scandinavian countries, including Sweden, where my great-grandmother was from. Like many families who immigrated in the 1800s, her family did not keep up with the language or traditions of her home country. My mother tried to remedy this. Every year she writes our Swedish relatives a Christmas letter written in Swedish, and she made a point of introducing me to Santa Lucia. One of the things I love about Santa Lucia Day is that in a time of year that asks a lot of parents, theoretically, on Lucia Day, children do the work and the parents benefit. I say theoretically because I imagine for young children it works more like kids cooking Mother's Day breakfast often does, i.e. the parent does most of the work and the kid just brings it in. But next slide, please. For the holiday, children dress up with the oldest daughter dressed as Lucia and the other siblings as her attendants, star boys and star girls. Lucia wears a crown, as you can see here on our tree topper, made out of greenery with candles sticking up, and with her star boys and girls, her attendant, she wears a white dress or robe with a bright red sash. Then they bring their parents breakfast in bed, consisting of coffee and sweet saffron buns. Early on, my mom just dressed me up as Lucia, but as I got older, I wanted to start bringing my parents coffee and Swedish ginger cookies, diligently getting up at 5 a.m., but much less diligently cleaning up the kitchen afterwards. Officially, Lucia represents St. Louis of Syracuse, Sicily, the patron saint of blind people, writers, and throat infections. She is a story somewhat similar to our St. Barbara, where she was supposed to marry a pagan, but she had promised her virginity to God and refused and then was killed. Very common story among female saints. But why do Scandinavian countries celebrate this Roman woman likely of Greek descent? Scandinavian Christians are mostly Protestants and do not frequently celebrate saint days. Her story is not, as I mentioned, not that remarkable among female saints. So what accounts for her popularity? I'm not an expert on these things, but I think it has something to do with the fact that up until the 18th century, her saint day, December 13th, coincided with the winter solstice. What about the greenery and candle count and her celestial attendants? These are among many things about Lucia that suggest her celebration is much older than European Christianity. Next slide, please. In pre-Christian Europe, the winter solstice, in pre-Christian Sweden and Scandinavia, the winter solstice was the day when Lucy Longnight would punish those who did not finish the work of preparing for the rest of winter. She would kidnap children left out in the cold, and she was described as a witch or a troll. In her work of punishing winter procrastinators, she was accompanied by a host of trolls and undead spirits. In contrast to Lucy's youthful image, St. Lucia's youthful image, Lucy is shown as an old woman, a crone. Next slide, please. In other Swedish version of St. Lucy's stories, she is accused of being a witch before she is killed, with the evidence of her witchcraft being her willingness to defy her culture for her Christian beliefs. She knows how she wants to live her life and is willing to fight for it. Here we see a witch is an independent woman with knowledge that is dangerous to a patriarchal society. In the version of her story that I learned as a kid, her eyes were gouged out, but she continued to see light. A witch is a woman who can see truths she's not supposed to see. Next slide. Lucia is the light in the winter, and as a light bringer, she is a bearer of knowledge that sometimes change comes with knowledge. In many Scandinavian countries, a young woman is selected to represent Lucia nationally. This image shows Daniela Owasu, who was voted to be Finland's first Black Lucia. She was hailed as an embodiment of modern Finland's multiculturalism and inclusivity. While she was elected by the citizens of Finland, she has received thousands of hate messages. Some messages were severe enough in nature that the police have become involved, and the organization behind the Lucia Festival is considering legal action. Daniela, meanwhile, has stayed focused on her work as Lucia, visiting hospitals and care homes at community events. I went looking for her thoughts on the racist abuse, and I couldn't find anything. As far as I can tell, she hasn't addressed it publicly. She's instead choosing to focus on how her selection reflects the values of a modern, inclusive Finland. Like St. Lucy, she is focused on defining her own role for herself. Thank you.
be the day of props. Can't, it's okay. So I'm Jewish and I grew up in Los Angeles. We celebrated Hanukkah at this time of year, and I'd like to share some of my memories. So here's one. I remember sitting at the dining room table with my family, and we're all staring at candles that are slowly burning down. And my father says, "The white one on the end." And I said, no, it's the pink one. And my sister says, no, it's the green one. My mother chooses the yellow one. So what on earth are we doing? Well, we've just lit the candles in the menorah on the last night of Hanukkah, and we're trying to guess which one's going to last the longest. Well, I was usually wrong, but it was great fun. So Hanukkah celebrates the rededication of the temple in Jerusalem in the year 163 BCE, and the miracle that a day's worth of sanctified oil for the oil lamp lasted 8 days. The Hanukkah menorah holds 9 candles. And this is a Hanukkah menorah, one for each night of the 8 days, plus one which is used to light the others, called the shamash, which would be in the middle. It's a little elevated. One candle is lit on the first evening, and on each subsequent evening, an additional candle is lit until all 9 candles, including the shamash, are lit on the final evening. My family used a menorah that my father made out of individual wooden cubes of walnut. He was a craftsman. This menorah is one that I inherited from my father's mother. It's not from Russia. She didn't bring it from Russia. It's actually from Israel, but it's nice. So here's a Hanukkah riddle. Which hand is best to light the shamash with? Well, here's the answer. Neither. It's best to use a match. So as you can imagine, food is an important Hanukkah tradition. And I remember my mother's homemade mandelbrot, which is a crunchy almond-flavored cookie. My mouth waters when I remember her homemade latkes, which are shredded potato pancakes, which we ate with sour cream and applesauce. Sometimes she baked a savory casserole called a Luxenkugel, which is made of noodles and soft cheese. So Luxen means noodle in Yiddish. A langer Lux means a long noodle, and it's a Yiddish expression for a tall person. So all you tall people are long noodles. Of course, there were lots of sweet foods in addition to mandelbrot: challah bread, rugelach, and jelly donuts. Several Hanukkah foods, including latkes and donuts, are cooked in oil, which reminds us of the miracle of the oil that burned for 8 days. So, by the way, what do you call a little speck that would fall into the latke frying pan? Well, it's a UFO, an unidentified frying object. So you're not the only one who can do jokes. Every night of Hanukkah, after lighting a menorah, my sister and I would receive a present. On the first night, it was a small toy, and on the 8th night, it was a major gift. Sometimes it felt like the 8th night would never arrive. We also received Hanukkah geld. Geld is the Yiddish word for money. On the first night, we received a few quarters and some chocolate coins. In the 1950s, a quarter was actually enough to buy something, and you might even get some change. So once in a while, my wealthy great aunt from Chicago would visit at the time of Hanukkah. And what would she give us? Silver dollars. I even still have one. So here's the question. How much Hanukkah gelt did the skunk give her children? Answer, 1 cent. So another memory is playing the dreidel game with my sister and our cousins. A dreidel is a 4-sided top. Each side features a letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Nun, Gimel, Hey, and Shin. And these letters are a Yiddish mnemonic for the rules of the gambling game, and we gambled with pennies. And I was thrilled when my dreidel landed on the letter Gimel, because it meant I got to yell Gimel and take all the pennies in the pile. It means take all. The letters also represent the Hebrew phrase Nes Gadol Haya Sham, which means a great miracle happened there, referring again to the miracle of the oil burning for 8 days. So about 40 years ago, I made a wooden dreidel for my children, and I reached into the bag of dreidels and I picked out the wooden dreidel, which is this one, but this isn't the one I made. I took the wrong one. So anyhow, but this is a wooden dreidel. Such is life. Got to look and see what I take. So here's another memory. I'm 6 years old, and it's mid-December, and my aunt and her non-Jewish husband park in front of our house in Los Angeles. On top of their car is a huge, big pine tree. They untie it and bring it into the inside. It's huge, too tall to stand up. So my father gets a saw and chops off the top so it'll stand up. And they also brought decorations, and I had fun adorning that tree with colorful lights, balls, and tinsel. It was the first time we had a Christmas tree in our home. I love the pine odor. It reminded me of the outdoors. So after that, my parents occasionally bought a Christmas tree, but we called them Hanukkah bushes.
For Christmas, the orphanage called the Kendall Children's Home of Dade County, Florida, puts on a show in the auditorium. The choir leader, Sister Angela Catherine, comes to the children's home every day. She lines us up and makes us practice the Christmas carols again and again. Oh, holy night. She stops and raises her arms with her stick in her hand and yells, enunciate, enunciate, open your mouths, over and over, exaggerating the words with her ample mouth. Wider, you should be able to put 4 fingers in your mouth. We start again. Oh, holy night. Hoping for appreciation, I open my mouth wide on the O and exaggerate each word like Sister Angela Catherine does, so she will notice I'm doing it right. The stars are brightly shining. My sister, Minnie, gets 4 fingers in her mouth while she's singing. But Sister Angela Catherine's admonitions are ineffective on others. She waves her arms and shakes her head so that the long sleeves of her black habit and her white starched veils flop around for emphasis. Louder, enunciate, I want to see the words in your mouth. So I get louder, and I can see the words in my imagination leaping out of my mouth. Now she'll notice. But her attention stays firmly on the troublemakers. The hour of singing is a relief from the sameness of every day, the walking in double lines along the disintegrating asphalt road to the bleak, low school building. A relief from the time alone in your small room where you're not allowed to keep toys. You have to discover the ways to amuse yourself with a comb and a pencil and a few sheets of paper. I don't mind missing the outside time. The kids are unfriendly, each in their own bubble of sad hopes. no one ever talks about, and everyone knows will never come true. The trick is to keep to yourself, never show weakness, and never cry. Mrs. Phillips is the matron downstairs. She's the raggedy, cigarette-smoking, dyed red hair Mrs. Phillips. On the night of the show, she hands out the nicest of our daily dresses and red ribbons for our hair and says, "I don't want any shenanigans. Be quiet and ladylike. There are important people here tonight. If any of you gets out of line, you'll have to answer to me. And no lipstick." I don't get it. We're little girls. No one wears lipstick. The auditorium, with its gray linoleum floors, shades of gray walls, rows of gray folding chairs, and darker gray low stage, is brightened tonight with wreaths and tinsel garlands. There are many colored Christmas lights strung around the room. There are heaps of presents stacked under a large, shimmering Christmas tree. Everything looks miraculously festive. We children are seated in the back. When it's time, we walk up in a double line and stand on risers in front of the stage. I am in the middle of the front row, doing my best to project. "Oh, holy night," I feel the reverence and wonder. The stars are brightly shining. The ceiling becomes a night sky full of stars, with one bright star radiating holy light. Fall on your knees. In my imagination, I'm falling violently to my knees with the multitudes, hearing the angels' voices. After some speeches and presentations by charity ladies in fancy dresses, Santa arrives. When your name is called, you're to walk up to the stage for your present. I'm hoping I might get one of the 2 gifts I had chosen from the little colored catalog. While many other kids' names are called, I begin to doubt that there is anything for me. Finally, I hear my name. The walk all the way up the side aisle takes forever, with everyone looking at me. I wish I could disappear. But then Santa hands me a big, brightly wrapped box. I have to wait till I get back to my seat to open it. It is the Shirley Temple dish set I had requested. There is Shirley Temple's curly-haired, smiling face in the center of each plate, beaming her belovedness and hope. Before long, my name is called again for another package. I'm ashamed of my greediness walking up twice. It's my second request, the baby doll with changes of clothes. She even comes in a little blue and green striped suitcase. Back at the dormitory, Mrs. Phillips sees me in the hallways and says, "You looked like a monkey up there." I want to say, I was enunciating, but I can see she is right. I looked foolish, trying so hard. We are allowed to keep our Christmas presents in our rooms. I put mine on the floor of the empty closet. Alone in my room, their magic seems to disappear. In the empty days that follow, I discover a story of books published before I was born. about the adventures of a little girl named Honeybunch. There are detailed descriptions of her everyday delights. I enter into her gilded world of belonging, pretty dolls, frilly dresses, and pretend tea parties, a daddy and a mommy, laughing, encouraging, and fixing everything that goes wrong. During the next 5 months, I read all 25 books. Each day I enter more into the greens and blues and yellows of the Honeybunch world. Sometimes I can hear the voice of the narrator inside my head, describing my own daily adventures, giving meaning to the invisible minutiae of every day. In those colorless months, my imagination comes to life, the narrator cheering me on, describing things as if I'm a hero of a worthy story, and maybe even someday I could be beloved, like that curly-haired golden girl. 5 months later, Minnie and I are adopted. I climb aboard the big, shiny airplane with my little green and blue suitcase full of hope.
Comic Dave Barry said, "Once again we come to the holiday season, a deeply religious time that each of us observes in our own way by going to the mall of our choice." Well, in my childhood, it was time for Christmas when Mother started baking rather frantically boxes of cookies for all the relatives and several favorite neighbors. We then got little meringue puffs that she would make with the leftover egg whites, and we liked it when Mommy baked. Remember that the important thing is not what you give or how you wrap it. The important thing during this very special time of year is that you save the receipt. Okay, the next big project in my childhood family was the big job of sending off Christmas cards. Mommy addresses the envelopes, Daddy writes little notes. Some will go to relatives who live quite far away, some will go to missionaries in other countries. My big sister puts on the stamps. At 7 years old, my job is to put the cards in the envelopes. I'm very careful not to crumple cards or envelopes, worrying, as always, about doing it wrong. Then there is the usual chaos as we decorate the tree with tinsel reused from last year. Finally, the angel ascends to the top of the tall fir. The ornament is so big, the top of the tree ends up leaning to one side. As for the outdoors, Father has never liked the task of putting up Christmas lights. He is not the guy in the movie who wants his house seen from outer space. This year, Daddy comes home with super heavy-duty strings of bulbs. I hold the box of sturdy outdoor brass hooks and hand them up to him one at a time as he twists each one securely into the eaves. The colorful lights are now permanent. Indoors, there's a switch for them. He's a man who likes to have things in order. This is the last time he ever has to fool with putting up holiday lights. By Christmas Eve, everybody is starting to wane. Both parents are fussy on easy days, but today has not been an easy day. Like most years, I have been wondering if there would be something in the way of a present for me. I can't exactly be described as a good boy. All year there are many reminders of what a disappointment I am. It is seldom clear exactly what lines I have crossed. My offenses are really too many to track. Still, I go to sleep hoping to slip through some seasonal loophole. On Christmas morning, the pile of presents is even more enormous than ever. The most wonderful item is a rideable pedal tractor. I stare across the living room at the object of my desire, thinking it couldn't possibly be for me. Finally, I go over and read the tag. It actually is for me. This is actually hard to absorb. The tractor is a deluxe model. It's tall, angular, entirely made of steel, like a real piece of equipment. It has a front loader bucket and a lever for picking up loose gravel and stuff and dumping it somewhere else. There's a trailer for my 4-year-old sister to ride in. It is a wonder beyond my wildest dreams. I recover from the surprise and get to the serious business of inspecting the yard and alley in my very own vehicle. Meanwhile, my mother is laboring fiercely over the big dinner. There is much to do. She flies into it with a fury. Mommy's vision of perfection is a Norman Rockwell picture of a big family around a table of plenty. We are going to be the very image of a happy family, or die trying. Now, my mother's never been a great cook. She grew up in hard times. Her father died when she was 2. The rooming house her mother ran in order to survive involved meals of minimal quality. Maybe having a grand holiday meal now is going to make up for all those tough years. Speaking of food, I think it was Ellen DeGeneres said, nothing says holidays like a cheese log. Yeah, but I digress. The afternoon is an invasion of extended family. Busy grandmothers, jovial uncles, overbearing aunts, and an assortment of energetic cousins arrive in full force. Oh, those frenzied cousins quickly hijack the tractor and drive it around rather roughly. Reminds me, some comic said his mother-in-law had come to their house 7 years in a row. He decided this year to have a change. They're going to let her in. Back to my story. I'm trying to keep up, Ken. Finally, dinner comes out. Saying grace goes on a bit, keeping us all waiting. When Daddy prays, there's a sense our connection with God is a little better than anybody else's. Then we eat. The food isn't fancy, but there's lots of it. And eating too much does bring a welcome to numbness. There's an abundance of gossip and complaining about the unfairness of life. Finally, the family mob eases out the door. Then, right on schedule, the mood in the house changes. Mother drifts off into some undefined disappointment. The details vary year to year, but the tone is forever the same. It is clearly time to look for a place to hide. She seems to want something she can't quite name. She works so hard to make the day wonderful. She seems to really believe in the magic of the holiday. Some feeling of amazing love and connection is supposed to erase her, loneliness? At least for one day? But Christmas never seems to rise to the level she had hoped for. Daddy has been too busy with his work as usual, but he did knock off long enough to scour the town for presents. It wasn't exactly clear what I did. Somehow, a child, I'm responsible. I don't know how I let her down, but maybe if I think for a long time, I can figure out how to make her happy. I find a place to hide. I go outside and get on my new tractor, pulling my little sister around in the small wagon. I wonder if we could just keep going, but there's no place to go, and I'm not actually allowed to leave the block. Finally, my sister, my playmate, gets tired of the game, goes in. The late afternoon shadows begin to lengthen. As long as I buzz around on the tractor, I can ignore whatever's happening inside the house. Fortunately, there is an alley just waiting to be explored. It's about 15 minutes remaining before sunset when I'll have to go in, but for 15 minutes, I am the master of my fate. I pull my rig out into the quiet alley. For now, this piece of the world belongs to me. I come in just before sunset and notice the mood has shifted yet again. Neighbors have dropped by. The big Italian family next door has left traditional cookies like they always do. The Mexican family across the alley brought home cooked tamales. The Jewish couple down the street has brought latkes. We eat quietly. The surprise treats mingle with leftovers for an international supper. Hurt feelings fade. Food helps. The spirit of the holiday has arrived by way of kindly neighbors. Those families each drew on their own way of celebrating, but they each spoke a universal language of love. So, action steps from today's service. First of all, thank you for all the sharers, Cecilia, Ken, and the trio, the triple goddess singing for us, and the marvelous Santa Lucia, wonderful, beautiful tradition. Thank you, Christine. Bart Simpson told us not to forget the true meaning of Christmas. You know, the birth of Santa. That's the last one, Ken. Okay, I'll stop now. Okay, seriously, the idea of a transcendent event in the wintertime is older than our familiar Western traditions. In the darker days, it is common for a longing to stir, for connection to others and to something larger than ourselves. It is time to hold our values close and serve the causes that call us. So some key points. In this season, be there for people. Let us be emotionally generous. Some are not feeling it. Try to be gentle. Be patient. Talk less. Listen more. Maintain social connections. This is for ourselves. For those of us who are spiritual but not religious, this is a time of togetherness. Hopefully there is a stronger sense of community. See if we can focus on gratitude. It is worth a moment to ponder our blessings, large and small. It is time for love, to settle grievances or set them aside, to see the good parts in other people. Remember those who have been kind to you. Think of loved ones, present and past. And especially keep up your reflective practices, whatever that is. Reading something inspiring, taking walks, journaling, being in nature, whatever keeps you in touch with your own interior mystery and the beauty of life. You don't have to be a believer to be a seeker, to be open to a blessing, some kind of inspiration. It is the time of year for that kind of thing. Perhaps a star from the east will guide us to a deeper sense of meaning and a stronger trust in life. Namaste. Blessed be. And so it goes.